Hey guys, it's Yellow J here, and welcome back to Mona, episode 2 in City Skylines. And first off, I just want to thank everyone who's returning from episode 1 last week. It was the first ever City Skylines video I've posted to YouTube, and a completely fresh start as a new channel, so I just want to thank all of you that left a like or left a comment on episode 1, or subscribed to the channel since it came out. It's all very much appreciated and it helps out a lot, as I'm sure a lot of you know. But yeah, I'm just really grateful for the positive response on Mona so far. I'm glad you enjoyed what I've put out, and because ultimately I'm just sharing what I've been doing in my free time. So, to all of you that like it, it really does mean something to me. But anyway, those of you joining us that haven't seen how this project started yet, there's a link to the Mona playlist in the description. Obviously there's only one other episode than this one so far, but yeah, make sure to check out episode 1 if you haven't already. And we are starting off very much where we left off in the previous one, right here in the very heart of our downtown area. And what you saw me do right at the beginning of the time-lapse was just convert a whole bunch of skyscrapers that we placed down here in the downtown in the previous episode. Just converted them into procedural objects, and then used the layers feature of the procedural objects mod to assign them all to a single layer that I can make visible or invisible with one click. And I knew that was something that I had to do in order to work efficiently detailing in our downtown area, because it would be really difficult to do so with all the tall buildings in the way. So this way I can just turn off the visibility of a whole bunch of skyscrapers so they don't get in our way of placing down details in our downtown area. And that's basically the majority of this episode, just starting this monumental task of detailing downtown Mona. So far you've seen me start that process by placing down some lower commercial buildings, which are actually pretty tall, but in the context of this huge, extremely high-rise and high-density city that Mona is, they're pretty low. So those commercial buildings are just going around the bases of our massive skyscrapers, and you've already seen me start to place down the billboards. Now, if you can't tell already, Mona's a pretty cyberpunk-inspired city, so this ultra-commercialized look, with advertising absolutely everywhere. It's very much part of the aesthetic of the city, just like what you see in Cyberpunk 2077 and lots of cyberpunk films like Blade Runner and Ghost in the Shell and things like that. And one of the things that you saw me do in this area is place down a couple of those steel frame props by Fine Builds and just go a little bit crazy, finding all sorts of logos and signs that are props, and then just raising them up with Move It, which just creates this absolute chaotic mess of advertising, which I love the look of. And then I just raised the whole group of props and POs and placed them on top of a building with a couple of light props to make sure it lights up at night. That's really important in this city. And, in hindsight, although I do like the look of this wall of logos thing, I decided it doesn't really make sense to place them in this part of the city. As the title states, this is the very core of our city, where all the corporations that decided to set up in Mona have their headquarters. So the advertising here is probably going to be focused on really big budget projects and big light up billboards and things like that, which I am placing down a lot of, but that style with the frames holding up lots of logos, I think it's probably something that makes sense more in the working class areas of the city. So something that we're moving on to now is placing down our first holographic stuff, which is really exciting. The holographic ads are going to feature quite heavily throughout Mona, and I think there's something that just they're really going to ground this city in the setting that I've decided on, which is, you know, like the 2050s. So all this holographic stuff, which honestly isn't that far off from reality if I'm not wrong, it's a massive part of making Mona look like it's in the future, right? And just really differentiating it from the kind of stuff that we see today, because I mean, you know, Times Square right now looks pretty cyberpunk, and parts of Tokyo, Hong Kong, even a lot of commercial districts in a whole bunch of Chinese cities, they're just like this huge mess of massive LED screens for advertising and like blinding amounts of blue light from all of them. I mean, even Piccadilly Circus in London right now looks more or less like what we saw in the original Blade Runner film. And like, you know, Hong Kong and Tokyo are basically the main sources of inspiration for the whole cyberpunk aesthetic when it comes to cityscapes itself. So like the holographic stuff is really gonna differentiate Mona from just a normal ultra commercialized cityscape that we can already find in many big cities today. And some of the holos that I placed down are by Nardo, who you might know from the City Walk City Wall Discord. So, you know, if you've watched City Skylines Mars or The Citadel by Cityscapes, or I think Minos by Dirty H as well, you should have seen some of those Nardo holos. There's like a big pack of them on the workshop. So yeah, shout out to you, Nardo, if you're watching this, because you know, you've been really supportive of all the stuff that I've been sharing on City Walk City Wall's Discord so far. And then some of the other holos are like real Chinese brands and corporations. There's this other pack by Peitao A. That's you know, the username's in Chinese, so that's how it's read in Mandarin, but I think if you just search holographic or hologram or something like that on the Steam Workshop, you'll be able to find them no problem. And there's one more pack of holos that's actually pretty old. It's the one with a whole bunch of like mobile phone brand logos, and I do not remember who made them, but they've been around for like a really long time actually. I mean, I remember them being used in Fluctrance's Avalon at some point, and that was years ago. So, you know, these assets that I'm using and everything else is, of course, in the mods and asset collection on the Steam Workshop. There's always a link to that in the description of this video, so if you want to use them in your own projects and support some of the fantastic asset creators that make work like this possible in this game, you can go ahead and check that out. Now, other than what I've mentioned, we're also placing a lot of just regular billboards and signs, you know, pretty much just scrolling through my entire Find It list, and just trying to really diversify like the whole streetscape with different billboards so that there isn't too much repetition. There's some great animated stuff as well, like there's this pack of animated billboards by Stringer Bell, who you might know as the asset creator that makes all these amazing flagship store assets, like the flagship stores for Gucci or Louis Vuitton that they're real, they're in various cities around the world, but yeah, those are assets that I have as well. And yeah, those animated billboards just add this whole other level of detail to the city and truly make it come to life. Because, you know, honestly, in places like Times Square in real life, most of the stuff is actually animated at this point. It's not exactly new technology, but of course, from what I understand, it's a bit more work in the whole asset creation process to make them animated. So I don't know if it's difficult, but I do know it's time consuming. Because later on in this series, I do dabble in like some asset editor stuff, but I haven't taken the plunge into making my own assets because that's pretty time consuming and honestly just beyond what I'm able to deliver for just a hobby. So, but you know, definitely I think that's on everyone's wish list, not just mine. There's never too much animated stuff that can be made for this game, you know. So I feel like I'm just constantly monitoring the workshop for more animated stuff to just like pounce on the first opportunity to add them to the Mona collection, just because of the amount of liveliness that it brings to Mona's cityscape. So as we move through these blocks of our downtown area, you're also going to see me add some residential buildings in addition to the commercial buildings that we've been plopping down at the base of our corporate skyscrapers. Now, there's like a short write-up in the description of what exactly Mona is, and I talked about it in detail as well in episode 1. But Mona is essentially a megacity in a timeline where the effects of the climate crisis have caused economic and political destabilization that's made most of the global cities that we know today just lose their advantage as places to do business and, where corporations want to be. So in terms of economic and political stability, rule of law, access to skilled workers, those are things that are just like eroded as the whole system of resource allocation starts to break down and entire societies break down. So both businesses and people from all over the world have started migrating to Mona, and the authoritarian-capitalist state here is providing that stability through oppressive methods, and working class migrants are just moving in to find opportunities just for work in a world that realistically has very few such opportunities left in other cities. So even right here in the very core of Mona's downtown, I want the cityscape to just really represent this inequality that is an issue in every real megacity that exists today, but exaggerated for essentially literary effect. If you're like me and see Mona like this whole build as a work of dystopian fiction, it's very much still linked to today's situation with regard to inequality. So we're placing down lots of high-density residential buildings, raising them up, and I do realize this causes some problems. It basically causes Sims to go flying to reach their homes when I unpause the game, so I do turn those that I've raised up with Move It into POs off camera. And in the downtown core, you can imagine it's probably like the more well-to-do income groups that are living in these apartments, but they're definitely not very nice apartments by any means, and that's just the reality of megacities where everyone wants to move in and live. In terms of housing situation, there's just no land to meet housing demand. And another thing that I want to talk about is my choice of buildings and billboards. So you see me placing a whole bunch of Taiwanese commercial buildings by Emperor Lee, and a whole bunch of Japanese and Korean commercial buildings by a few different asset creators, and they all have billboards that are obviously not in English, and I'm also just placing down a whole lot more signs in Chinese and Japanese and Korean. And now obviously the whole cyberpunk aesthetic, like I said, was heavily influenced by Hong Kong and Tokyo, like how they looked in real life in the late 20th century. So a lot of these cyberpunk films, like, they feature a lot of Asian languages as part of the cityscapes that they were portraying anyway. But again, like I mentioned, Mona exists in a timeline where there's widespread instability around the world as a result of climate change. And Mona itself, like I'm imagining it to be on the California coast like Night City is, and the global political situation of this universe has, very clearly been shaped by climate change into something very different from what we know today. So I definitely see people from all over the world moving into Mona, and Mona is this truly international city, like just with migrants at all income levels, bringing all their different languages and cultures here. And I do wish there were more Spanish language stuff for billboards specifically. I'm using a bunch of Latin American and Spanish assets which have Spanish language logos and things, but with this city being set in North America, and on the west coast of North America specifically, I think it would be nice to have more representation of the Spanish language, just because of the sheer number of people that I'm imagining are living in Mona that speak it. And there would be just a lot of advertising dedicated to that population in real life. So, as we close up this episode, I'm just working on the finishing touches for these couple city blocks that we've been working on this episode. The final billboards and signs to make this whole place come alive, and the cinematic shots, and we're also detailing the train tracks that we laid down in episode 1, with Ronix's expressway pillars and the railway replacer mod decorative networks, just to get a nice cohesive look on these commuter rail tracks. And we're gonna have the class 345 crossrail trains by Meshed running on our railway lines, just because they're fantastic assets, and I think they look both futuristic and timeless enough to be running in the 2050s. I don't think they'll look dated like many of these so-called futuristic things usually end up looking, so yeah. So before we close out, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and especially watching all the way to this point. You can leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you know how that helps out. It's very much appreciated, as you know. And in the next episode, we'll be continuing in this general area and building our very own custom train station, entirely out of networks and props and procedural objects to serve this whole downtown core area. So do look forward to that. I hope it's gonna be a very unique episode for the City Skylines series. But with not much else left for today, I'm gonna leave you all here with the cinematic shots of what we've built. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you very soon for the next episode here in Mona. So until then, take care of yourselves, and goodbye.